Topics on the Joy of Football today include Xabi Alonso, Mark Robbins, Emiliano Martinez, Ousmane Dembele, the laws of the game, handball, how much can you ruin them, and so much more. We're looking at West Ham, Aston Villa, Newcastle, the most entertaining eras in their history. And we're just touching on how Martin Tyler played up front with Puskas.
Aguero!
The joy of football. Hello, and welcome again to the Joy of Football podcast, the greatest addiction in the world, football. And Martin Tyler, the voice of the Premier League, but also commentating for many, many years on the Champions League. And that's going to be a theme today, the Champions League.
It's been another amazing experience. The quarterfinals, just breathtaking, really.
It is astonishing that it is still, time after time, the best tournament in the world.
Well, I suppose it should be, really. It's the whole continent, isn't it? The best players have gravitated to one country or another, one club or another. But this is the time where they all get paired together. And I know that probably the one criticism, the format is changing. It'll be very interesting if we're still sitting here in a year's time, seeing how we got to this stage by the new format. This is the joy of football, Neil, not the rant about changing football. But clearly, for all the wonderful storylines and great goals, great narratives, they still want to change it. So, and they are UEFA, and they have every right to do it. So, but you've got to top it, and that's a real challenge for the clubs involved next season.
But it's the knockout stages where it really gets going. Although this year, actually, the group stage was particularly good, especially that group with Milan, Newcastle, Borussia Dortmund, and PSG. But I want to kill joy. I want to just make the point that this year, although it's been as fabulous a tournament as ever, I don't think the quality has been as good. And in fact, I felt that for the last few years. And I just want to take 1.5 hour of football.
I thought you were going to talk about half an hour of this.
Very quickly, Manchester City versus Real Madrid, extra time. They were just both so knackered. And if I look back on extra times in the last 10 years, I can only remember one that was really riveting, and that was the World Cup final, the France-Argentina World Cup final.
It is a debate in our domestic Carabao Cup here. We don't have extra time, do we, until the final, I guess, does. But it is a scary thought, really, that the players get tired. I mean, they are so fit. I think it's the emotional side that drains them. But I know what you're saying about the quality, but the truth is football is different now, and the quality of football that you're referring to, I think, is balancing brilliant defending with brilliant attacking. Now in the domestic leagues, we're getting in the Premier League averaging over 3 goals per game. It hasn't happened for decades, and we are getting reattuned to games with lots of goals. But in the back of our minds, we go, well, as everyone does who watches football analytically, how could that have been stopped? Is that the sort of goal that defies? In my very limited coaching career, but it's quite a long one, but limited at the level it's been at, you say to the players, look, if you let in a goal and it's whacked in from 25 yards into the top corner, it's not the goalkeeper's fault, a worldie if you like, just take it on the chin and get on with it. Try and score one yourself. But then all the other goals are really analysed to the nth degree, really. 5 mistakes in leading up to that, and I'm sure that's the sort of point that you're making, really. But the goals and the drama and...
It's brilliant. I'm giving you warning now that before the end of this podcast, I'm going to ask you what is the best goal you've commentated on this season.
I thought you were going to say the best goal I'd ever scored.
No. Can I just tell everybody that in every conversation we have when we're not actually recording, Martin keeps reminding me that he played football with Puskas.
I did, yeah. It's a story we haven't told, actually. 1986, there was a media game. We were representing Europe against Brazil, really, although the game was played in Mexico. But Clodoaldo played, Rivellino played, and it was pretty serious. It was in a sort of, I think, a second division stadium in Mexico City. About 8,000 to 10,000 people there. We had some good players with a right back who, if you look him up, I think his name was Roma, who played and then got injured when he was about 23, but he was a media person then. He was brilliant. And we had Jean-Michel Larquet, who played for Saint-Étienne and was very well known as a French broadcaster by then. And then Puskas arrived. Really, it's just to sort of come and say hello. But we got him some kit, and he and I kicked off the game together. How could this ever happen? He didn't last very long, but we did win the game. And I have to tell you, because they are professional footballers, are competitive, whatever they're doing, whether they're playing a charity game or playing a game of darts or chess or something like that. That Rivellin and Clodoaldo were not best pleased that they lost. I think the very next day, Brazil got knocked out of the 1986 World Cup by France. And Jean-Michel Larquet treasures that evening before the evening to the day. It was a double barrel. He was on the winning side against the Brazilian World Cup stars from 1970, and his beloved France got through. So no wonder I talk about Puskas and me. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? It's ridiculous, but it does age me a little bit. And of course, Ferenc is no longer with us, but it was a pleasure to have trod the same pitch.
Yeah, I'm sure he said the same thing as well about you. Right, okay, we're going to do things in a slightly different order this week so that we can attack certain thoughts, and we're going to start with what we finished with so far: 3 of the best,
and he makes them pay. Or words to that effect.
He still can't remember what he said originally.
I mean, imagine how many words I said on that FIFA computer game.
Right.
But people do remember, because at Chelsea recently, the last Chelsea game that I was at, our sound man, he was asking me about the podcast. And I said, we do this thing, Neil's come up with it, it's called 3 of the Best. And he came up with a line. So he's a FIFA player, but he's under 30. So don't expect the oldies to remember it word for word.
And we do young player, old player, and
Yes.
player. So give me your young player for this week.
Well, he got no real credit on the night because other stories took over. A squabble over a penalty and 4 goals for Cole Palmer. Alfie Gilchrist was the scorer of the 6th goal. And
who came through the youth team at Chelsea. And this is my cat Tamori, who's come and entered the podcast.
He didn't come through the youth team at Chelsea, but his namesake did.
His namesake did, yeah. Now, go on, Tamori. Run away. I know you're very fast.
And that joy, it was a footnote for the game, really, wasn't it? And but Alfie found out what it's all about, scoring in a Premier League game. It was a beautifully taken goal. I'm sure many of you have seen it. And he's been just chipping away at a Premier League career this season, always used as a substitute. Started in the FA Cup and building some experience. They link him to John Terry because he's local, and also he's got that, I don't know, devilish defensive quality. But this was something, JT scored plenty of goals for Chelsea, and about one like this, I'm not quite sure they did. Neil might remember one, but I just think it was worth recognising. It didn't really get recognised, didn't get an inch in the newspapers because of the dispute over the penalty taking and the fact that Cole Palmer stole the show, really. But I'll remember it for Alfie, and good luck to him.
Yeah, brilliant. And a player who, for me, shows that, to begin with, attitude is everything. Because we wait to see if he's got Premier League qualities. Hopefully he has. We haven't seen enough yet of him. But he's definitely got Premier League attitude, Premier League mentality. And, very impressed. Cole Palmer was my young player. Was it last week? The week before? I mean, that was just world class by him. But my young player this week, I'm cheating. Because he'll be 25 in May. But so many players don't reach their best until that age. And if you look at a lot of the big clubs, until recently, and this policy of buying young, really they bought players when they were 23, 24 years old, and they were just beginning to establish themselves as top players. And I saw Bournemouth play Manchester United recently, and Bournemouth played 2 up. Dominic Solanke and Justin Kluivert, who, of course, is best known for his dad. But Justin Kluivert was signed by Bournemouth as a winger, but they've turned him into a second striker. He plays off Solanke in a 4-4-2. And he tore United to shreds. And he was absolutely wonderful. And he's had a very difficult career up until now. It was you who said to me when I talked about that game.
He played in the top division in many a country.
Yeah. Well, he came through at Ajax. He went to Roma for nearly 20 million euros. Didn't really do it there. Was loaned out to RB Leipzig. Was loaned out to Nice the year after that, who had an option to buy, which they didn't do. Loaned to Valencia. So that's the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, France and Spain. And then Bournemouth bought him last summer for around 11 million euros with 1.5 million
He's
add-ons.
scored in all those countries because we were waiting for him to score a goal for Bournemouth to be able to add that to the list, which he has done a couple of times.
Yeah. I was deeply impressed by his whole performance, and he's not a winger. He's definitely somebody who can play off a striker, and he caused United endless problems. He was intelligent, he was fast, he was full of desire, he was non-stop, and Justin Kluivert may have taken a little longer than his dad to
Dad
arrive.
Scored in the Champions League final at 18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The winning goal.
Yeah.
Ajax versus Milan.
It can't be easy to follow such a famous name. And in passing, because it's topical, I want to say well done to Nigel Clough, who of course had to grow up as Brian's son and playing for his dad as well, and has forged a very successful playing career and is now still putting down those Clough values in management, and it's a great effort. I've watched him coach. He's a terrific coach. He actually let me join in a five-a-side once when he was manager of Burton, and I was on his team, and he was the best player. He was no longer playing in the side, but he was still the best player out there. So yeah, Nigel, well done.
Promoted
with Mansfield. Yeah.
Yep. Old player.
Old player. It's always a little bit tricky, I think. But I remember him as a player, but he's going to be mentioned in dispatches over the next few days. By the time you watch this might have happened. It's Mark Robbins of Coventry City, who's managing for a second time. He's been there since 2017 on this stint. He's only, I think, ever going to manage in the Premier League, which goes for a lot of homegrown coaches if he gets a team up there. And, of course, he's been very close. But he's
penalty shootout last season in the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's very relevant because the FA Cup semi-final against Mark's first club, Manchester United, and although Manchester United constantly deny it, I'm going to still stick with the theory that he saved plain Alec Ferguson's job in the third round of the FA Cup away to Nottingham Forest in 1990, when Fergie had been there a good few years without really setting the heather on fire, as he would say. And that goal, if they'd gone out to Nottingham Forest in that game, the suspicion was that would have been the end of the Fergie times.
And it was a last-minute equaliser, wasn't it?
It was a winner, wasn't it?
Was it a winner?
I think it was a winner. Yeah. We better check that, boys. But and they and he scored in the. It was basically a sub at the time when they had one sub or played if somebody was injured.
Solskjaer.
Yes, yeah, and he scored in the semi-final, and they won the cup. And of course, now they're playing Manchester United in an FA Cup semi-final at the new Wembley. He also is in the record books as a player. So that's why he's an old player, not a young man. He's in his 50s, I suppose. To me and you, he's young, but maybe Mark doesn't feel that quite. But he was the first Englishman to score a hat-trick in the Premier League. The second to Eric Cantona, who was still at Leeds when he scored the very first one in 1992. Mark did it for Norwich and away at Oldham, and it was the first away Premier League hat-trick that scored, so he's in the record books as a player. And when he started at Norwich, having left Manchester United, he played in the opening game of the season, and they were 2-0 down at Arsenal at the Highbury, and he scored 2 and Norwich won 4-2. So his goal-scoring record was very, very good. But as a manager, you know, he's been around clubs, Huddersfield and Barnsley and Rotherham, and of course 2 stints at Coventry. And his teams have always played good football. And I just think, you might be watching this and Coventry might have beaten Manchester United in the cup, in which case we'll be talking about him in the next podcast as well. But this is by a few days pre, and he deserves a bit of luck really to get. I think he should manage in the Premier League because he's served his time, and sometimes people get a chance because of what they might have done relatively recently as players. But it's a long time since Mark stopped playing, but he's managed astutely. He's never been out of a job for anything for a few days, I don't think. So within the game, he's recognised, and I guess just to get him into if he was to get a successful semi-final, and who knows, Coventry. I was there in 1987 when I actually went to the game on the Tottenham Hotspur team bus as the reporter for ITV, and the Tottenham that lost 3-2 to Keith Houchin's diving header and all that. So it's a fascinating time, and he's come into the limelight again because of what Coventry have done in the FA Cup. That win at Wolves was just extraordinary. We talked about, the game isn't what it was defensively. I don't care, that kind of excitement. We get that kind of thrill, unless you're a Wolves fan, of course, but it was in an extraordinary season of drama and a goal-filled drama. It was wonderful.
My old player is Xabi Alonso. Who, of course, has now won the Bundesliga as manager of Bayer Leverkusen, their first ever Bundesliga triumph. After, do you remember, famously in 2002, they came runners-up to Bayern Munich in the league, runners-up to Real Madrid in the Champions League. They were runners-up in the DFB Pokal, the German Cup. And of course, Germany were runners-up that year in the World Cup to Brazil. So some players were 4 times runners-up that season. I'm not thinking of you, Michael Ballot. Well, I am, but to win it after Bayern Munich have won the league 11 consecutive years, and knowing that Bayern Munich have double the player budget of any other club in Germany, is just such an extraordinary achievement. But I want to go back to Xabi Alonso, the player, because he's a Basque boy who came through in northern Spain and played for Real Sociedad.
He lived in the same street as Arteta.
Really?
Yeah. So Wikipedia says, so I have to believe it.
But is it Sociedad is the team, isn't it, where you actually have to be born in Basque country?
Athletic Bilbao.
Is that Athletic Bilbao?
No, I think these are restrictions that come and go, but in principle, yes.
So he played there, went to Liverpool, went to Real Madrid, went to Bayern Munich, didn't have a bad playing career, won the World Cup and a couple of European nations.
All clubs that he's linked with being his next managerial move. But it's not going to happen because he's said he's going to stay. And that's a sensible move.
And because I think he's waiting for Carlo Ancelotti to say, I've had enough, I'm retiring. And I think he's got Real Madrid lined up, is what I understand.
You heard it first.
So, I don't
think second.
Yeah. But I want to talk about Xabi Alonso, the player, because everyone's talking about him as a manager at the moment. And he, of course, was part of the Liverpool team that didn't win the league in 2009, when it was him and Mascherano with Gerrard at number 10 and Torres at number 9. And that was some team, wasn't it?
It was, and he comes over as a manager very much as he came over as a player. Thoughtful, intelligent, very rarely wasted a pass. Had this extraordinary capacity for long-range goals as well. And picked a moment. I can imagine he's a good golfer off the tee. I can imagine he's pretty good. But he left a very, very good impression in England in the Premier League as a person and as a player. And I think that's continuing. He hasn't, I don't think, put a foot wrong on the field at his time. Of course, there were good games and bad games, but off the pitch, he seems to have covered everything. I mean, it's amazing what they've done. We are talking on a day when they're playing again after their celebrations for winning the title, so we don't want to outdate ourselves.
But Leverkusen's ground, it's got a capacity of something like 30,000. That's all. It's small. It's when you're up against the 80,000 of Munich, or 78,000, whatever it is, Munich, and 80,000 of Dortmund.
It is incredible because they had a reputation as a team of chokers. Yeah. Now they're by never losing.
Yeah. Well, I just want to tell a quick story. Chelsea went up there in 2009 to Anfield in the Champions League. and 1-3-1 Branislav Ivanovic, 2-goal Branislav Ivanovic. But I was told afterwards that the tactic was to press really tight on Xabi Alonso and to let Javier Mascherano have the ball, because the feeling was he wasn't nearly as creative with it, despite being an Argentine international and to become a World Cup finalist himself. He wasn't nearly as creative with it as Alonso.
Few were, to be honest, and he's got so much more to offer. What is he, 42 years old?
Yeah.
He's got another 20, 25 years for the
So
joy.
when he retired from playing, he became manager of Real Sociedad B. He got them promoted from the third tier of Spanish football to the second tier, and there's very few second clubs in the second tier. In fact, the year that they were in, they were the only one, and they got relegated. But he stayed 3 years there to learn his trade in Real Sociedad B, and only turned down a lot of offers before he chose Leverkusen to go to.
And he's staying at Leverkusen because he recognises that his experience is limited and very successfully limited, but it's just a year. And it's great. You know, when you've been around the game a long time, you see these, you commentate on these lads as players, and then you watch them grow into coaching and management and the media, of course, as well. And it is part of seeing people develop is the fun of, in our jobs, we're professional observers, really. And I might have mentioned this before, but twice this season I've commentated on players who are the grandsons of players that I've commentated on in the past. Jack Hinchelwood at Brighton, his late grandfather, Paul Hinchelwood, played at Crystal Palace, and the other members of the family. Martin Hinchelwood is a great uncle, and his great granddad, Wally Hinchelwood, played for Chelsea. We had this conversation once in the 1940s, I think. So there's that, and the famous Gray clan at Leeds United with Archie now, and of course his great granddad Frank Gray, who managed Woking, by the way, in passing, and his great uncle Eddie Gray, and in between the other Andy Gray, not the Andy Gray Scott from Villa and Sky Sports, his Archie's dad Andy was a pro as well. So it does make you feel old, but it is nice to see them and to be able to talk about things that happened 50 years ago. There aren't that you have to find a granddad to talk about the games that I started with, and I found one actually, haven't I? So,
who's your player this week?
Yeah, well, this is an easy choice really, because I was given the privilege of doing the 2 quarterfinals between PSG and Barcelona. So Ousmane Dembélé came out of it smelling of roses, having not really started particularly. He is such an intriguing player because it is a bit hit and miss. And of course, I think the most problems he's had in his career have been injuries. But ex-Barcelona, left in the summer, no one really grieving too much about that, I think, from the Barcelona perspective. So the first
Apart from Xavi, probably. He wanted him to stay.
Yes, I think he did, yeah. And so the first game, which Barcelona win in the Parc des Princes, Ousmane Dembélé scores. There was a bit of a comeback from 1-0 down to 2-1 for PSG, you'll recall. He scores. It's only his second goal of the season. We are in April, and they are a dominating team in the league. And he's, of course, had more injuries as well, but only his second goal of the season. And then at a key point, he gets in again and just misses, and that's a sort of up and then down of Ousmane Dembélé. So Barcelona win 3-2, favourites to go back to their temporary home in the Olympic Stadium in Barcelona to just get the job done, seal the deal. And they score first. Rafinha, who's obviously well known in this country, had got 2 goals in Paris, and now he gets one, a lucky one really. So it's all set up. And then it goes to 10 men because Ronald Araujo, the Uruguayan defender for Barcelona, gets sent off. And so there's a balance, but it's still got a game's still got to change in the scoreline dramatically. But the way it started was Ousmane Dembélé came in on the back post from a very acute angle, smashed it into the roof of the net, and that lifted the whole possibilities for Paris into maybe probabilities. And then straight afterwards, just like in the first game, it was a difficult chance, I have to say, but he was just off target from a tight angle, similar to when he scored, but just, and it was a lovely close-up of him going like this. I missed just by this, and you could see
finger and thumb.
Yeah, his personality was coming through, and he's obviously got an extrovert side to him. But before the game, before the goal, he was getting booed by the home fan. He fell over in a rather ungainly manner, and it looked like, oh yeah, well, your history, and we're going through, and you're going out and everything, you're going home with no more European football. But then he did something as the game then swung, obviously Paris' way, 11 against 10. But he then did something which, again, summed him up with, he's taken a heavy touch just inside the penalty area on the right hand side, his right on the right of Paris attacking, and the heavy touch invites João Cancelo, another man well known in this parish, He and Cancelo thinks, I can win this, but Dembele's just quick enough to get there first, and it's a penalty. And that was the moment Mbappe scored the penalty, and that was the moment they went ahead in the aggregate. And he came off, but he's so televisual, he's got a great smile, and he had so much to smile about. And given the history, given the fact that the Barcelona fans were on his case and that he was supposed to be a sick note rather than a sensational player. And even like in the World Cups, he didn't play in the final in 2018. He was on the bench, but he got a winner's medal. And then he did play in the final in 2022, and he got subbed in the first half. He gave away a penalty. And this has been like that. But when it's up, nobody expresses it any better. So that's my player.
Yeah, I first heard of him when he was at Rennes. And a year older than him, Gal Kakuta, who everyone at Chelsea thought was going to be a world star, went on loan to Rennes for a year and couldn't get a place in the team because this is Mane Dembele, a year younger at 17, was in ahead of him. And then the following year, I saw him for the first time. I went to the group stage 6 game of Real Madrid, Borussia Dortmund for Sirius XM, and in the States and Canada, because Christian Pulisic, aged 17, was playing for Dortmund on the right wing, and Dembele was number 10, aged 18. And Madrid took a 2-0 lead with Benzema getting both goals. And then Dortmund made a sub, and they brought on, I think it was Marco Reus for Pulisic, put him at number 10, and put Dembele on the right wing. And at 10 and on the right wing, but especially on the right wing, he was just outstanding. And Dortmund needed a draw to win the group. And their totally anonymous centre-forward scored a goal and made the equaliser. And that was all he did all game. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. So it was terrific.
Terrible
game.
habit that.
It was
scoring.
It was a fantastic game, and Dembele was incredible. But I do think he's one of those players. I look at him now, and I'm not sure he's better now than he was when he was 18.
Well, he had a great night in Barcelona.
Good
back
for him.
in Barcelona.
Love him.
A big smile.
Right. Well, my player this week is someone that I imagine a lot of people listening to this will loathe, and in many ways I do, but I wish he was at my club. Emiliano Martinez. I think there are 3 world-class goalkeepers in the Premier League. I think Alisson, Ederson and Martinez, and I think there are a lot just under that level, not very, very high level. But Martinez, how did he not become a first teamer for so long? Why did Arsenal not fancy him? Why, when he got into the Arsenal team finally, when Lino was injured in that game at Brighton, do you remember that? And he came in and he won the FA Cup. And even then, it was clear that his character was different to all other footballers. He went crazy when he won the FA Cup. Why did they let him go? Why did they not want him? And Villa snapped him up. And Villa are looking good for the Champions League 4th spot. If you look at the fixtures left, they and Tottenham have. They've got a much easier run in than Tottenham have. And it would be brilliant. Villa have never played in the Champions League, have they? They've played in the European Cup, obviously, and won
the European Cup.
But they've never played in the Champions League. And Martinez, let's just remember, Messi had a long international career and never won anything as an Argentine. And Martinez gets in the Argentina team. He had a cracking Copa America when they won it. He had an outstanding World Cup when they won it. And although I didn't think his second season at Villa was as good as his first, this season he's been absolutely terrific again. And I think Emiliano Martinez is one of the handful of best goalkeepers in the world.
It's a great backstory. I'd love to sit and chat to him about it, because he was so many years at Arsenal. In fact, we didn't even know he was called Emi or Emiliano, because his first name's Damien, I think. So we all called, oh, he's on the bench, Damien Martinez. You know, finally, when he got in the first team, Arsenal put us straight, us being the broadcasters. And he was loaned hither and thither, wasn't he? And I guess he was to a point of, this is enough, I need to go back home, when he got his chance. So he literally grasped it with those hands of his. And you were right. But of course, Leno was the number one, and when Leno was fit, it was I think his last game was the Community Shield. They were both in the August, because it was the pandemic year, wasn't it? So Arsenal won it with in front of no crowd really, and that was the penultimate game. And then he basically they played him in the Community Shield because he'd been the goalkeeper in the FA Cup. But then Leno was fit, and clearly it was Arteta made it clear that he wanted Leno to be his number one. And clubs had seen, as you quite rightly articulate, the potential, what he'd shown. Yeah, he misbehaved a bit at the World Cup, and he probably regrets some of that now. But that kind of emotion, particularly when you think you're on the way out, you're never going to get there. You're never going to get to be a first-team Premier League goalkeeper. You're never going to be an international goalkeeper. From what I remember, he didn't perhaps offer the best challenge when he was a backup goalkeeper, but when he got in, thought he was in to stay. It wasn't, and it's Villa's benefit. So it's a really good tale. And again, I emphasise some of the joy of following football is these are people we're talking about. They're not robots. It's not a computer game. Though I do like the computer games, as you know, but it is. The human side of it is what keeps us young, really.
Yeah, and just talking about best goalkeepers in the world, Borussia Dortmund 4, Atletico Madrid 2, another fantastic game, although again, quality of football, but a fantastic game. But Jan Oblak, Atletico Madrid, maybe not quite the goalkeeper he was 5 years ago.
He had a bad night, didn't he?
Whereas Martinez, incredible. Right, look, we're taking up all our time on this. We're really running out of time now. So let's move on to...
The letter from the Gantry, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Right, here we go. I know many of you are intrigued about a commentator's life, and indeed, judging by the number of young people reaching out to my colleagues and myself, plenty want to follow in our footsteps. And unlike when I started, there is now a definite career pathway through plenty of excellent media and broadcast courses which are available. Now, here's one insight into the profession from a recent Premier League fixture at St James's Park. All commentators' hearts skipped a beat of joy when they saw Newcastle United come out to face Tottenham Hotspur wearing a different style of shirt numbering. In fact, a return to a style of shirt which had been used quite regularly on Tyneside in decades past. This bespoke set of kit had a white square on the back of the traditional black and white stripes, on which large red numbers were splendidly visible. In contrast to the regular tops, with a full set of stripes front and back on which the numbers are superimposed but very difficult to decipher, but which, according to the club, are much more suitable for the popular replica shirts market, which I think Newcastle started actually. If you go back, there was always those black and white stripes shirts on fans up and down the country 20 years ago. This design had already been seen in this season because UEFA insist on clarity, and a similar kit was worn in Newcastle's Champions League games. But on the club's ruling, and they are quite entitled to do this, I must say, no white patch on the home shirts for domestic games. But in checking out why this change had been made for this particular game, I came across a much more compelling reason behind it. It wasn't simply just to keep the commentators happy. On the kit was a special logo, RNID, the Royal National Institute for Deaf People. Through club sponsors Seller, Newcastle had located supporters challenged by hearing loss and provided them in the stadium with this style of shirt into which was woven haptic technology. That's electronic sensory modules to enable those hard of hearing to hear the roar in the ground to the full, to get the full match day experience, which we take for granted maybe. The service will be extended throughout the remaining home games on Tyneside. With 12 million people in the UK suffering from deafness or hearing-related problems, it's a great initiative. It had much more relevance than the bright visible shirt numbers, and from a commentator, that's saying something. Well done, Newcastle United. However well you know the players in my job, the numbering on their backs is very important to the main role, the main real thrust of what we do, identification. As a rookie, I was given by ITV my Wembley debut for an under-15 schoolboy international between England and Germany in the late 1970s. That was a big thrill. And it was live. I had watched both groups of youngsters training and was feeling fairly confident as I arrived for the game. That confidence was shattered when I heard that Germany were insisting on playing in white shirts, which of course was England's colour of choice. Neither nation had an alternative. Hard to believe, but true. The only solution I was informed of was that Germany would have to buy a strip in a different colour from the nearest sports outfitters to the ground. These days, kits of all shapes, sizes and colours are on tap. It was nothing like that back then. I found it hard to believe that a full set would be available anywhere, and it was certain it would not be numbered up. Waiting for the verdict inside Wembley was as nerve-wracking as any moment in my entire career, and this is my 50th year in the job. I never found out from where the kit hunters got their prey, but they arrived back at the stadium with a set of yellow shirts with numbers. This rookie could not have been more relieved. It finished 2-2, and as far as I can remember, I got the significant details right. I think Paul Rideout scored in 1978, and 17 years later, the same Paul Rideout was scoring the winner in the FA Cup final in the same stadium for Everton. I was earning my stripes back then. You can guess what's coming, can't you? But all these years later, it's the stripes on the shirts that cause consternation. Fans seem to think that the old designs are not a patch on today's kit, but all commentators would vote for that white patch, which shows off the numbers properly. That wasn't the reason behind that change at home to Spurs. It was for a very good cause, and it may well just have been a one-off, but it was very welcome. And Newcastle did win 4-0, so why not stick with it?
Yes, I do think numbers have become a big problem. I had a lot of trouble with Everton's second kit numbers recently, and I do think it's become from the stripes are terrible. Brentford, even with the small stadium, I mean, although the good thing about Brentford players, they've all got big personalities, so they're sort of easier to identify than some, but it is a problem, and I think it's something that isn't given sufficient respect now in comparison to how it used to be.
We're talking about initiative for deaf people, and which is great. I'm glad I found that out and able to bring it to the podcast, and I'm sure there's more to come from it. But what about those who are colourblind? And there is a very well-known commentator, Jim Proudfoot. He won't mind me saying it. He's made it public. He suffers from colourblindness. So certain combinations that are not a strict contrast make it very difficult for him to do his job. It's wonderful how he overcomes it, and you wouldn't notice. If he hadn't told me, I wouldn't have known it. I'd done it for years before he did make it public. But I do think that's something that should be factored in as well. And I also believe that the kit manufacturers and the number manufacturers, who I think may be separate, maybe that somebody's in charge, gets the rights for all the numbers for the Premier League and all the numbers for the Football League, maybe a different company, that they are aware of this. But of course the clubs have the right, as I mentioned in the piece there. And we've got young producers here, maybe they'll tell me why, but it's not cool to wear a shirt. You have to buy a number if it's got a patch on it, and that's extra cost. But if you just have the black and white stripes, or in Brentford's case, the red and white stripes, and same down the back, it's more of a style thing. It's a better style than having just a blank on the back of the shirt. That's what I've been told by Newcastle, and yeah, listen, it is their choice, and their fans are very special. So we'll go along with it, and we'll do our best to shout the right name in the right place at the right time.
I'm just shocked that you said that they were the first club to sell their shirts to their supporters, because I was always under the impression whenever I go up there that they don't wear any shirts. that's an old one.
I don't. It's a good one. I don't think it's official that, but my impression as a commentator in the early years of the Premier League were you didn't see too many replica shirts, and of course other things have had in our squad numbers, names on the back of the shirts. That's all extra cost. So if it's a plain and simple shirt and the fans want it the way it is, the fans should have it the way it is.
Right, we're gonna go in a moment to something that we did last week, which was best time of our lives, and look at certain clubs and when was the most entertaining time of their lives. But right now, we're diving into the voice of passion.
Voice of passion.
Yes, so my voice of passion, which, as everyone knows, sometimes gets me into a bit of trouble, and your voice of reason, which tries to keep me on the straight and narrow.
Keeps me out of trouble, I hope.
I want to pick up on something you said last week, actually. I want to talk about the handball law, which drives me out the wall. You said that we never had any problem when it was a question of whether it was deliberate or not, and that was it. I get what you're saying, but I think that's wrong as well. I think that we need proper interpretation of the game, and that if there is a handball in the penalty area which punishes the attacking team in terms of play, it's a penalty. And if it doesn't, play on. Now, I'll give you the big example where this became such a major issue, and it was the 2002 World Cup quarterfinals, Germany versus USA. USA were 1-0 down, and their current coach of the men's national team, Greg Berhalter, who was a defender, shot for goal. Ollie Kahn in goal, blocked it. The ball bounced along the line, bounced up, and Torsten Fringe, who was next to him on the goal line, it hit his hand, and that stopped it going in. And the referee was Stuart Dallas, famous Scottish referee, whose explanation for not giving a penalty afterwards was that he didn't think it was a deliberate handball. It shouldn't matter. If the ball is going into the goal and it hits someone on the hand and it's not deliberate, I don't want them sent off. I just want a penalty. Get on with it.
And now you get them sent off.
Well, the laws of the game are stupid. The laws of the game are absolutely stupid. And it's just, if it negates the attacking team's play, it should be a penalty. No big issue. It's just a penalty. Get on with it.
You want two handball laws then? And I don't. I just
But it's
want it
not
to be the
two,
same.
because it's that all over the rest of the pitch.
If that happens outside the penalty area, it's not a handball.
It is. If you think, if somebody...
It's not going in the goal, so you're not going to...
Oh, yeah, but if somebody puts their hands out and it hits their hand, not near the body, it's not deliberate, but it's handball.
If I block a shot on the line, the ball just hits me there...
Oh, that's not a handball.
Well, you're saying it is.
No, I'm not, because if it hadn't hit your arm, it would have hit your body. So it's
well, that's another interpretation.
Yeah, no, it's not.
I don't mean to. The ball hits me there. I don't mean to handball. If I do that and the ball hits me there, it's a handball.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
that's simple, isn't it?
But it's in the same way. In the same way, if you do that, you're stopping it going. For people not viewing this, I'm now thrusting my elbow out with the. We're
surrounded by cameras here. It's very misleading for somebody whose career is in television to know that this is mostly heard. I apologise. What I'm doing is just letting a ball whack against my bicep and then saying that's not handball, because it shouldn't be handball at all.
I'm
but
thrusting my.
Neil says it
my
should
arm.
be because I'm on the line stopping.
No, because if it hadn't hit your arm, it would have hit your body. So it's not negating the team. It's not negating
That's
the
another
attacking
condition
team.
you're applying.
It's not another condition. It's the very basic. Does it negate the attacking team's play? Does it enhance the defending team's play? That's the only question that should be asked. And yes, it needs interpretation, but we need interpretation from intelligent referees. I'll come on to that on another voice of passion, intelligent referees. You have been warned. But it's something that, I mean, for instance, now, if someone balloons a shot that's going miles over the bar and the defender throws his hands in the air, is that a penalty? If it hits his hand and it's going miles over the bar?
As if it's in an unnatural position.
I know. I think if it's going miles over the bar, the referee should have the freedom to interpret it and say, nah, it's not a penalty, if it's going miles over the bar.
The complexities of the world of Neil Barnett, the simple world of Martin Tyler is deliberate or not, very easy to decide.
Torsten Frings
if there's any doubt about it, then it's not deliberate.
Torsten Frings may well not have been deliberate, but it robbed a perfectly valid goal that would have made the quarter-final of the World Cup 1-1.
That is the game, Neil.
Okay, we agree
To
differ. Right.
We do.
Okay, that's handball law.
And we're still good mates, I promise you.
Now, last week we went through a load of clubs. Best time of our lives, we called it. And we're going to do a load more clubs now for just the most entertaining period of their history. We're going to start with 3 Premier League clubs, 3 of the big clubs that we didn't do last week. So here we go. Best time of our lives. And I'm going to start with the new big club in financial terms, Newcastle. What for you is the most entertaining period of Newcastle?
Well, it would involve Kevin Keegan, of course.
You, of course, by the way, are doing games. I'm doing eras. You're doing
Yes, I've got
commentary
a game at Portsmouth when they got promoted, when Keegan was playing, with Beardsley, Waddle and Keegan. And it was just an exhibition of cheek, class and quality. And I know I saw Peter last summer, actually. We were up in Newcastle. I was coaching Dartford. We went to see Newcastle play at Gateshead, actually, and met a lot of nice people. And but Peter remembers that game, and I think he's probably got it on a loop on his phone, showing the goal where he walks the ball in the net. And of course, you can compare that with the early years of the Premier League when they got promoted in that second season, and they were christened the Entertainers. So fantastic. And Kevin, player manager, was at the heart of it all.
Just one word on Keegan. He was obviously a terrific player for Liverpool and won their European Cup, their first European Cup, and then went to Germany. But didn't you think when he came back from Germany, he played for Southampton and then went to Newcastle, didn't he? Runner-up, I think, with Southampton. Didn't you think when he came back from Germany that he was a far more intelligent footballer, that he learnt something in the Bundesliga that he hadn't learnt in the old First Division?
I knew him very, very young in his career when he first went to Liverpool from Scunthorpe, and he thought about the game deeply. I think he worked harder than most players of any era, really, to get himself into the shape physically and the skill mentally. And I don't just mean with the ball, I mean the craft of being a goal scorer and working with the likes of John Toshak in those early years, and that sort of telepathy that they had. That he's always been very, very academically involved, if you like, in improvement, but also, like you, a voice of passion. He's a very passionate person as well. And that he kept on learning. And I think if you go and play in a different league, a different culture, and you come back and you've done really well there, then you are going to have an extra spring in your step. Maybe not physically as the career winds down, but certainly in terms of knowledge and just stealing an extra yard on an opponent, dropping a shoulder here, a dummy there, taking a shot at a different angle or early at a different time. You learn, and he learnt a lot. And but he was a real buzz bomb of a player, you know. Brilliant. He was, as a commentator, of course, you couldn't mistake him for anybody else, so that was a great advantage as well.
Well, his era as manager of Newcastle is my most entertaining period. Yeah. I mean, you just look back to those centre forwards: Andy Cole, Les Ferdinand, Alan Shearer. I mean, it was just phenomenal. The football they played, it was front foot. It was exhilarating. It wasn't always tactically full of acumen. It was just full of passion.
I think it was ahead of its time because a lot of coaches play that way now. Much more risk. And Kevin's teams always took a risk. And it was, it was a wonderful period for Newcastle, and they'll be hoping they'll recapture some of that. I think they're really well organised under Eddie Howe, and they're going through a process. But if they can sort of up, we found out this week that their wage bill isn't huge, so they're not quite a very, very big club in that very important aspect of football. That they will be able to play with that kind of panache. But great memories and great fun to be there. And,
brilliant. And you did the 5-0 surely over Man United.
I did. Philippe Albert, who works for Belgian TV, might well see him at Wembley this weekend. And we always we greet each other as he did it and I was lucky enough to hold the microphone.
Aston Villa. Aston Villa going for the Champions League. They're a kind of... By the way, can I just say... a lot of people won't see football stadia empty, but people like you and me see football stadia empty rather a lot. And I think that Aston Villa empty is the best looking stadium in the country. That claret and blue and the old and the new and the way it's married together. If you ever are at Aston Villa and happen to get there early for a game, go in, because I don't know if you agree with me, but it's a very handsome
I agree
stadium.
with you 100%. Unlike earlier in this podcast. And I find that walking around the outside, it is like looking at a piece of ancient history. Obviously, a fantastic club, original club, but they've kept the sense of history. And it is more modern in the stadium. Still pretty intimate it generates great noise, the whole end. Good commentary position, very important. And I've got a couple of games coming up, actually, and so I'll report back on how it is. But because you do see it, it's sort of set on a triangle of roads, isn't it, really? And it sort of stands proud. And this Aston Villa team are standing proud as well.
And an Aston Villa game? It's funny, isn't it?
It's tough to remember because there've been those years where they haven't been so good. I would have to go to a game that I didn't commentate on, which was winning the European Cup. Under Tony Barton, who took over. Ron Saunders won the league, and then fell out with the club. And Tony Barton stepped up, and wasn't a number one for very long. But what a thing to have on your CV, And
an extraordinary game that I remember so clearly. They lost their goalkeeper after 7 minutes, Jimmy Rimmer.
Nigel Spink came in and started his career, really, And Peter Wood scored the goal. Gary Shaw was a great player. They have good attacking players. And people like Dennis Mortimer in the engine room in midfield. And
Gordon Cowans.
Well, I actually played against Gordon Cowans once. He turned up. He was still playing for Villa and possibly England at the time. And we played a charity game at Paget Rangers, which is in the Midlands. And... I don't know. It's Gordon Cowans, and he's just like. Sadly, he's been reports he's not too well at the moment. So we wish him all the very best in his life as it is today. But he turned up, and whether they were short, and he said, "I've got my boots in the car." And a friend of mine who became actually well known in football in the boardrooms, was chairman of Swansea and Bristol Rovers, named Steve Hayman. He was our midfield player, and we went in at half-time, leading 2-1, I think. And I said, "You're doing a great job on Gordon Cowans." And he went, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, the number 8 or whatever it is." I said, "That's Gordon Cowans." And he's 28 years old or something like that. And of course, Steve panicked and realised that we was playing against it. It wasn't quite the same in the second half, but it was great. He was a lovely man and a lovely player. Yeah.
And the other thing that's nice at Villa, the stadium, which you'd appreciate, is they've actually got the words of the Brian Moore commentary in the European Cup final.
Yeah.
Opposite the whole tent, isn't it? It's the other end.
It's a banner strung along there.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Yeah. And as with Brian, the actual commentary projected with that wonderful voice of his, and simple and to the point, and most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, identification, the accuracy of the names, and that's when you look back at one, people say, "Oh, you did well on that." I think, well, at least I got it right. If you do that great moment and somehow something slips through, or you mistake one player for another, which can happen, But
Tony Morley on the left wing as
Yeah.
well. I think he's up on that manner. You'd have to go for that team, I think, for me. I mean, there have been... I think that Martin O'Neill got Villa playing quite entertainingly 15 years ago.
Some good high place finishes in the Premier League.
And
This team, I'm really fascinated by Ollie Watkins, who his critics say he's a winger masquerading as a centre forward. That's centre forwards who are jealous of how well he's doing. I saw him play as a winger for Exeter, and he had a bit about him. But what is so impressive is the way he talks about the game. And he mentioned recently a goal that he scored where he said, "I wouldn't have scored that before, but now I know how to relax, when to release my shot." And he has assists as well as goal scoring on his CV, and he's a cert to go. All this talk about whether it should be Ollie or Ivan Toney, it should be both. And that's where football is. We've sort of touched on it in one or two topics about, come on, we've got to risk now. We've got to play the way the game is playing out so brilliantly in our club football, with a lot of English players doing very well in it. So I hope that's what's going to happen, and that those other two, I mean, Harry Kane clearly knows every blade of grass in Germany now, so he should be feeling at home. And we'll see. But Ollie Watkins in this team, passionate manager in Unai Emery, and some really good footballers that have been there, some of them before him, and he's bringing the very best out of them. And as you rightly pointed out, a very good goalkeeper.
Yeah. In the 1950s, England's manager was Walter Winterbottom, who was thought to be a great science art manager.
He was an educationalist, really.
And he picked a team for an England international, and I'm trying to remember the story because I don't think I was born quite, with three centre forwards in the old WM formation, as they called it. So you had a centre forward, two inside forwards, and two wingers. But the two inside forwards and the centre forward, he picked three centre forwards. One was Roy Bentley, who I knew, and this is where I got the story from, the late Roy Bentley. I think one was Stan Mortensen, and the other would have been, goodness me, I can't remember the other one.
Not Nat Lofthouse or something like that. That was that era.
It was someone like that, yeah, probably, very likely. And he said he picked us, he gave us our numbers so we knew what position we were going to play, and he never said another word to us. There were no tactics, no guidelines, didn't tell us what he was expecting from us. We just went out there and played. I think they got heavily beaten, but it's just, you're talking about throwing the forwards on if you've got an issue. Now everybody would have picture boards and goodness knows what.
It's a lot of what if in coaching today. What if we lose a player sent off after 10 minutes? What if we lose a player sent off after 85 minutes? What if we're 2-0 up at half time? These are all scenarios that the data men go through, and what is perhaps the pragmatic choice or the risky choice, or what options are. But I believe that coaches should respect the game, respect the history of the fixture, respect the opposition, but trust their instincts at the moment. And I think that's what separates the very good from the good. And that is the challenge for anybody in any game. And it's not an exact science. You can do what seems right, and it turns out wrong because the ball hits the inside of the post and stays out when it could hit the inside of the post. That's the margins. That's what we're talking about, the joy of football.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
is the joy of football.
Well, the margins are the joy.
Yeah.
Manchester City lost on penalties. If they won on penalties, everything would be rosy and every decision would have been right. Now every decision's wrong because they lost on penalties. Crazy. Right, one last club. Best time of our lives, West Ham United. A commentary.
I can tell you the strangest one, which was against Castilla. And it set me up for the pandemic, because I was probably one of the few commentators who'd done a game with no crowd, and West Ham fans had somewhat misbehaved. I think Castilla being the B team of Real Madrid, but they were in Europe somehow. I don't know quite how that happened. Probably a Cup Winners' Cup. and the game was played behind closed doors at Upton Park, which was a hotbed of atmosphere. Visiting players hated it. It was so close that you could almost get a cuff around the ears from a fan when you're taking a throw in. It was like I had actually seen that happen there. So that they won 5-0, but you could hear the shouts and from the dugout, and it was an odd one to do, but I've watched it again. I always say heard it again because you can't hear too much apart from me shouting the goal scorers. It's on YouTube, so that was back in the early 1980s. I think the last game at Upton Park I'd have to pick, really, which had a thrilling ending and gave me and these are, I have to mention this once every 10 podcasts, I guess. We don't write down what we're going to say when something happens. You react to it. And if you get the reaction right, people say, oh, well, you must have written that down beforehand. And if you get it wrong, people say you're a rubbish commentator. So either way, you're in trouble. Winston Reid scored the last goal. And so
New Zealander.
Yes, yeah. My last words were, read all about it. and so that was a joyous personal moment, but for the club, it was the right way to go out. Although my final memory was going back to my car after the game. It was a terrific night, and was walking in the road, and some bloke shouting at me, if you don't get off the road, I'm going to kill you. And this car was going to drive into me. That was the last time I ever went to Upton Park. And I promise you, West Ham fans, it's not the defining memory, because the first time I went was 40 years earlier, where I played with Ron Greenwood's son for Corinthian Casuals, Neil Greenwood, and Neil invited me to a West Ham game. And I was not a journalist or anything, but we were invited in to see his dad and talk about the game in the 1960s. And that was the West Ham of Moore, Hurst and Peters. So that was a real privilege. So yeah, mostly happy memories until that very last day. I'm almost frightened to go back to have a look at what it's like now. I think the outside is still there. I don't know about the inside. They made a movie, didn't they, after the ground had been closed. They made one of those movies that sets there. I can't remember the title of it, but if you want to look at Upton Park as it was from around this, it's all shot in the rafters and below stairs and stuff like that. And it's kind of nice to think that still exists in the memory and on film as well.
Obviously, that 60s team with Hurst, Moore and Peters is the standout team. West Ham came to Chelsea in the middle of the 60s and drew a game 5-5. And many years...
I was there.
Yeah, well, there you go. And many years later, I was sitting in the press box at Stamford Bridge next to Bobby Moore. And I said, you played in that 5-5 game here, didn't you, for West Ham? And he said, I don't know. 5-5. I went, yeah, you played. He said, what year was it? I said, 65. And he goes, suppose I must have done then. He didn't remember it. I think
it might have been 66, because it was in the winter of 66, after the World Cup was won. What I can remember of it, when Woking weren't playing, or I wasn't playing actually, because by then I was playing, I would go to the game, and you could just turn up on the day, like you can't do now, sadly, just buy a ticket and get in. I was in that paddock near the halfway line, and Tony Haitley, Mark Haitley's dad, many of you listening won't even know who Mark Haitley is, but he played for England. His dad didn't, but his dad was one of a breed of centre forwards who's heading the ball, got him a professional career. And he got amongst, I think it was 5-3 to West Ham at one point. And actually, I can remember thinking...
That was 66, 67 was his year at Chelsea.
So I wanted West Ham to win because I'm an England fan, and I wanted the boys of 66 to win the game. And then they went 5-4, 5-5. And I know it was televised because it was the old day, before LWT had the London franchise. I think it might have been ABC or some letters anyway, the television company did cover the game. They had Sunday afternoon highlights.
Yeah.
And when I was working for ITV, which was a long period, I tried to find it because a
lot of those games got
junked, didn't
they?
Yeah.
I went there for Chelsea TV and went through every flipping game that they had, trying to find stuff they didn't want and we could take.
That was, but it was, it's amazing that we've both come out.
Yeah.
That's one of the non-broadcast.
Bobby Townling got the goals that made it 5-5.
Yeah.
I think he got 4th and 5th or 3rd and 5th. And I think that took him to 100 league goals. And I think he did a little lap of honour at the end. Bobby Townling. Another one not so well.
Probably cost me 1 and 6 in old money to get in to watch a game like
that. One day I'll get Martin talking about the player who made him into almost a Chelsea supporter, because he was a Woking player.
Ex-Woking player, John Mortimer, yeah. Played over nearly 250 games for Chelsea.
He did. He played 250.
Yeah. And was manager of Benfica. So he went from Woking to Chelsea, played a bit for QPR, and then went on the managerial circuit. But as was fashionable at the time, couldn't get a job in the UK, go elsewhere. And I think he won a championship in Portugal.
He did?
Yeah.
In fact, in 2012, when Chelsea
got me talking about it now, let alone another podcast.
In 2012, when Chelsea played Benfica in the Champions League, I took him out as the half-time guest. Yeah. And I had to persuade certain people at Chelsea who had never heard of him that he would be a really good guest to have. And they were delighted when he was in the director's box, because of course he was an ex-school teacher and he was very learned and very proper. Yeah. And he came out, and because he hadn't played since the mid-60s, I had to explain really to the Chelsea crowd who he was as well. So he came out, did his lap of, hello, how are you? I wouldn't call it lap of honour, to the sports. He got a splendid welcome. But he was 3 years in charge of Benfica. And when he got to the Benfica fans, they were falling off the upper tier to get to it. It was unbelievable. And we got back to the tunnel, having walked all the way around, and he just turned around to me and in that very proper voice and said, "Goodness, what a reception."
He was very well spoken, yeah.
Lovely man. And good player. Good player. Okay.
Woking, keep producing them.
We've come to the end. So much more we were going to have in, but we've come to the end because we don't want to outstay our welcome. We will have another best time of our lives next time, in which we'll be going to Champions League teams. So stick around or come back for that. One thing I was going to bring up this week and haven't had time to is the best law change ever. What has been... because they fiddle around with the laws so much now and too much. What's been the best law change ever? If you want to have your say on that, email us to the joys, plural, the joys of football podcast @gmail.com. What has been the best law change ever? And we'll maybe have a look at that next week. I'm off to get a shirt where if I put a name and a number on it, you'll be able to see it.
I'm off to hope that Woking don't get relegated.
From Martin and me,
take care.
Try. And the last word, if you want to follow us on social media, just put The Joy of Football in and it will come up as the podcast on all its elements. And of course, you can email once again on the joys of football podcast @gmail.com. Take one.
Aguero!
The joy of football.